Leonardo Salles stood before the massive drafting table that dominated his studio, staring at the blueprints that had consumed his every thought for months. The lines on the paper weren't just architectural, they were declarations. Rebellious curves defied the symmetrical monotony of suburban conformity. Triangular windows pierced the tradition of square panes. Sloping, uneven walls mimicked natural landscapes. This wasn't just a house. It was a manifesto. He knew the risks. Symmetry Hills was governed by a Homeowners Association with an iron grip, a regime that demanded every roof be a mirror of the next, every lawn identically trimmed, every brick obedient to their code. But Leonardo didn't believe in lines for the sake of control. As a renowned architect once celebrated for daring designs across Europe, he refused to let his new home become another beige clone in a row of beige clones. This house, he vowed, would breathe. It would be an organism of art, movement, and meaning. While others submitted to the HOA's cold efficiency, Leonardo's home would be a monument to the human spirit. As he sketched the final lines of what would become a battleground, he whispered to himself, "Let them come. This house will speak louder than their rules ever could." Symmetry Hills looked like it had been photocopied from a suburban fantasy. The streets were immaculate, the sidewalks always power-washed, and the mailboxes stood at precisely the same height on every lot. Each house bore a similar facade: beige vinyl siding, black shutters, two-car garages, and square lawns cut with laser precision. It was the sort of place where difference felt like danger and uniformity passed for peace. When Leonardo arrived, driving his old, matte black pickup filled with raw materials and towering sketches, neighbors peeked through their curtains. They had heard whispers: an architect, recently returned from Europe, moving into Lot 67. Some hoped he'd bring prestige to the community. Others feared what his visionary spirit would mean for the neighborhood's fragile order. None expected what he would actually build. The HOA welcomed him with a thick binder of regulations and a forced smile from its president, Martha Klein. Her handshake was firm, her eyes cold. "We maintain excellence here, Mr. Salles," she said, tilting her head toward the binder. "Deviate from the standards, and you'll hear from us." Leonardo smiled politely, accepted the binder, and never opened it. The house he was planning wouldn't fit in those pages. It would burn right through them. It arrived on a crisp white sheet of paper, slipped into Leonardo's mailbox with surgical precision. Notice of architectural noncompliance. The letter, stamped with the official HOA seal, outlined 7 violations detected during a routine observation. Items like asymmetrical window placement, unauthorized exterior material, and non-standard roofing pitch were listed like criminal charges. The letter ended with a warning. Failure to amend these violations within 15 business days will result in fines and formal HOA action. Leonardo chuckled as he read it. He expected the first shot to be fired eventually, but he hadn't anticipated such a rapid response. The house was only halfway built, its skeletal beams still exposed, its glassy walls not yet sealed. Yet even in its unfinished state, it clearly defied every rule Symmetry Hills held sacred. He pinned the letter to the wall beside his blueprints, a badge of honor marking the first spark of resistance. He walked outside with a cup of black coffee in hand and surveyed the lot. A few neighbors were gathered near the sidewalk, whispering and pretending not to stare. Leonardo raised the coffee cup in a mock toast and smiled. Let them talk. Let the HOA fume. He wasn't just building a home, he was building a statement. And no notice, no threat of fines was going to slow him down. Martha Klein had ruled Symmetry Hills for nearly a decade, and under her leadership, the HOA transformed from a bureaucratic committee into an authoritarian regime. Her doctrine was simple: order above all. To her, houses were not homes, they were units. Every deviation from the community standard, no matter how minor, was an act of insubordination. She believed that chaos started with a red door or a curved garden path. Leonardo's project, in her eyes, was nothing short of rebellion. Inside her air-conditioned office, walls lined with HOA plaques and community awards, Martha reread the compliance report on Leonardo's property. She had dealt with dissenters before: artists who wanted murals, families who wanted vegetable gardens, even a retired professor who had installed a wind sculpture. But none had ever dared to build an entire house so far removed from regulation. Leonardo's name was quickly added to her mental blacklist. She summoned the HOA board to an emergency meeting that evening. As she clicked through photos of Leonardo's angular design and non-conforming facade, her voice remained calm but sharp. "This isn't just about a house," she said. "It's about setting a precedent. If we let this man finish what he started, the entire neighborhood could unravel." The board murmured in agreement. Plans were already taking shape, but Martha knew this would require more than letters and fines. This would require intimidation. By week 3, Leonardo's house had become a spectacle. People from outside the neighborhood began driving through Symmetry Hills just to catch a glimpse of the structure rising like a modernist phoenix among colonial clones. The framework was composed of irregular angles and unexpected cantilevers. A wall of tinted glass arched like a wave facing the street, reflecting the sun in unpredictable patterns. Every corner of the house was a statement, defiant, deliberate, and unapproved. The construction site was alive with motion. Leonardo's contractors, mostly old friends from architecture school, worked with surgical precision, following plans that looked more like art than engineering. He had ordered special materials, stone slabs imported from Brazil, reclaimed steel from a decommissioned bridge in Belgium, and sustainable bamboo sourced through a personal contact in Vietnam. Every piece told a story. None of them had been submitted for HOA review. Neighbors began complaining to the HOA en masse. "It doesn't match the community. It makes my house look cheap. It's attracting strangers." Martha Klein capitalized on the unrest. She released a memo titled, "Preserving the Integrity of Symmetry Hills," and within it, accused Leonardo of endangering community cohesion. But Leonardo wasn't building for approval. He was building for vision. And unpermitted dreams, he believed, were the ones worth chasing. It started with a curious local journalist named Eliza Monroe. She had driven by the construction site on her way home and was struck by the bold asymmetry of the house. Intrigued by its contrast against the uniform backdrop, she reached out to Leonardo for an interview. Expecting reluctance, she was surprised when he welcomed her with open arms, offering espresso and a guided tour through what he called a living rebellion. The interview, filmed with Eliza's handheld camera, captured Leonardo's passion, intellect, and defiance. Standing amidst scaffolding and sunlit glass, he spoke of architecture as resistance, of beauty as freedom, and of the dangers of enforced uniformity. "They want to control what a home should look like," he said, eyes intense. "But no one tells me how to dream." The footage was raw and unpolished, but it struck a chord. Eliza uploaded it that same night with the title, "The Man Who Dared to Build Different." By morning, the video had gone viral. Architects, artists, and anti-HOA activists across the country shared it with fervor. Comments flooded in, some praising Leonardo as a visionary, others mocking the absurdity of HOA power. Symmetry Hills, once a quiet, invisible suburb, found itself at the center of a cultural firestorm. Martha Klein watched in horror as her perfectly curated world began to crack. The line had been crossed, and now retaliation would come. 3 days after the video's explosion across social media, a thick, hand-delivered envelope arrived at Leonardo's door. Inside was a formal cease and desist letter from the HOA's legal team, accompanied by a 30-page document of accumulated violations, including claims of community disruption, unauthorized structural improvisation, and a new, vague clause, endangerment to the harmony of the neighborhood. At the bottom of the final page, it read, "Failure to comply will result in enforcement measures at the HOA's discretion." Leonardo read it slowly, the way one reads a threat they know they won't honor. He poured himself a drink, whiskey this time, and stared out the window at the rising shell of his home. He didn't feel fear. What he felt was confirmation. The HOA had exhausted its tools of bureaucracy and was now leaning into veiled threats. They weren't expecting him to stand firm. But that's what made him dangerous. He called a meeting with his small team that night. His daughter Maya, the coder, Theo, the retired structural engineer, and Javi, the silent carpenter who built like a sculptor. "They want to scare us into quitting," he said, holding up the letter. "But they're bluffing. And if they escalate, we'll be ready." He rolled out a second set of blueprints, hidden beneath the original ones. These weren't for the house, they were for defense. For war. For art that fought back. The first time Leonardo saw them, it was just past midnight. He was reviewing structural schematics in his studio when the low growl of engines pierced the silence. He stepped out onto the second-floor balcony and spotted 4 motorcycles circling slowly around the cul-de-sac. Their riders wearing all black, helmets down, faces hidden. They didn't stop. They didn't speak. They just circled like vultures around a battlefield not yet declared. The next night they returned, this time closer. One revved its engine as it passed Leonardo's lot, kicking up a cloud of dust and gravel. A window cracked on the far side of the structure. Maya, watching from the shadows with a drone controller in hand, launched one of her modified camera drones to follow the bikers. The footage confirmed it. They weren't neighborhood punks. Their patches bore the symbol of the Iron Rain, a known outlaw biker group from across the county line. This wasn't neighborhood enforcement. This was hired intimidation. Leonardo gathered his team. "We're past letters now," he said. "They've brought in outside muscle. They're trying to wear us down, shake us into submission." Theo, who had once constructed blast-resistant walls for embassies, simply nodded. Maya pulled up a 3D model of the property on her tablet. "Then it's time," she said, "to activate the house." They all understood. From this moment forward, they were no longer just building a home. They were preparing for siege. The transformation began at dawn. From the outside, Leonardo's house looked unfinished. Scaffolding still clung to one side, glass panels yet to be sealed. But within the framework, something far more deliberate had taken shape. Steel reinforcements, hidden in the walls, were connected to a central hub controlled by Maya's custom-coded interface. At a single command, shutters would drop, doors would lock, and motion sensors would activate across the entire property. They called it the Shell, a protective mode designed not just for safety but for psychological warfare. Maya tested the perimeter triggers as Theo installed vibration-sensitive floodlights around the edges of the lot. Pressure plates were concealed beneath decorative gravel, designed to disorient trespassers with blinding flashes and high-frequency pulses. Javi reinforced entry points with dense panels disguised as minimalist art. Leonardo, ever the architect of expression, made sure every defense was also beautiful. As night fell, the team initiated full lockdown for the first time. The house responded like a living creature. Mechanical sighs, hydraulic clicks, panels sliding into place. Leonardo stood at the center of it all, watching his dream morph into a fortress. Outside, the silence of the neighborhood grew heavier. The bikers hadn't returned yet, but everyone knew they would. And when they did, the house would not just defend, it would make a statement. This wasn't just resistance. This was performance. By the 10th day of tension, the house had evolved into something more than shelter. It had become sentient in its own eerie way. Powered by a network of sensors and AI routines Maya had spent months perfecting, it could respond to movement, sound patterns, and temperature shifts. It tracked the motorcycle's engine signatures, logged their appearances, and adapted its defense routines in real time. Every approach, every whisper of rubber on asphalt, triggered a subtle change in the house's posture. Maya dubbed the system Athena, after the goddess of wisdom and warfare. Athena learned quickly. When the bikers approached from the east side, motion-triggered lights illuminated their path in staggered sequences, disorienting their vision. When they lingered too long in front of the house, a high-frequency pulse, inaudible to human ears but maddening to engine sensors, sent their bikes sputtering. The system didn't just repel, it humiliated. Inside, Leonardo walked the halls like a general inspecting his fortress. "Architecture," he whispered, "isn't just about shelter, it's about power." Every doorframe was now pressure-sealed, every vent monitored. Even the shadows in the house were strategic. He had designed a structure that breathed, responded, and protected not out of fear but out of principle. The house wasn't paranoid. It was prepared. And soon, The HOA would realize that they weren't dealing with a stubborn neighbor. They were up against an architect who had built intelligence into his very walls. Beneath the main structure of the house, accessible only through a disguised hatch beneath a sliding stair tread, lay a secret level, Leonardo's sanctuary of contingency. The underground space wasn't listed in any permit request or structural diagram. It housed backup generators, emergency supplies, 3D printed components for rapid repairs, and a digital command center with feeds from every sensor, drone, and camera on the property. It was here that Leonardo planned for outcomes he hoped would never arrive. On one wall, an enormous corkboard was filled with sketches and maps, diagrams of HOA power lines, sewer paths, and a map showing the bikers' known hangouts. Maya's laptop was hooked to a secure satellite link, masking their transmissions and feeding data from online activities surrounding Symmetry Hills. The room felt more like a war bunker than a part of a house. And that was exactly the point. Leonardo wasn't simply reacting anymore, he was anticipating. Theo added the final touch. A concealed tunnel exit leading to a shed 2 properties away. A leftover utility line widened and reinforced to serve as an escape or ambush route. "We're not going anywhere," Leonardo told him. "But if this escalates, and it will, we're not going to be caught flat-footed." With the house above growing smarter and the bunker below growing stronger, every inch of Leonardo's dream was now laced with strategy. He wasn't just building resistance, he was building inevitability. Maya Salles had always lived in the shadow of her father's architectural brilliance, but she carved her own legacy in code. At 17, she had already won 2 underground cybersecurity tournaments and developed AI tools that universities begged to license. While Leonardo built walls, Maya built networks, virtual defenses woven with the same precision as her father's blueprints. The house, as intelligent as it was, would have been blind without her. She customized Athena to not only defend the perimeter, but to infiltrate the digital ecosystem of Symmetry Hills. With a few keystrokes, Maya accessed the HOA's private servers, pulling meeting transcripts, emails, and security camera footage from the community gate. What she discovered chilled her. The bikers weren't just warners. They had been paid in cryptocurrency through a shadow account tied to a shell company, one that had Martha Klein's signature masked beneath legal firewalls. Instead of confronting the HOA directly, Maya got creative. She began leaking small, carefully selected files to local activist forums, emails hinting at corruption, backdoor property deals, and manipulation of neighborhood fines. As the pressure mounted outside, she weaponized truth from the inside. "Information is architecture too," she told her father one night, "and I'm done letting them build walls around it." Leonardo smiled, not just with pride, but with awe. The house had grown teeth. Now it had a voice. The call came late on a rainy Thursday evening. Leonardo dialed a number he hadn't used in years, one he remembered not from a contact list, but from memory etched during war zones of construction and protest. When the line picked up, a gravelly voice answered with one word: "Where?" That was all it took. 3 days later, Augusto Vieira, once known as the Hands of Stone, stepped onto the lot with a canvas bag slung over his shoulder and a scowl carved deep into his face. Augusto wasn't just a builder, he was a legend. He had erected border hospitals during revolutions, fortified schools in regions torn by militia rule, and designed moving walls that could vanish in seconds. Retired for years, he had vanished into the countryside after a fallout with corrupt urban planners in Lisbon. But Leonardo had been one of the few he respected. When the request came, Augusto didn't hesitate. "You don't call me for concrete," he said. "You call me for war." They set to work immediately. Augusto reinforced weak points in the structure with tension cabling hidden in artistic beams. He laid shock-absorbing pads beneath potential impact zones and crafted pivot panels that could redirect invaders into blind alleys within the house itself. His knowledge of both creation and destruction was unmatched. As he hammered steel into the frame of an inner atrium, he looked up at Leonardo. "They think they're attacking a man," he said. "They don't know they're waking a movement." The HOA headquarters, usually a sterile room filled with plastic plants and dull beige furniture, had become a hive of chaos. Board members argued over whether the situation with Leonardo had spiraled beyond their control. The leaked documents Maya had planted were gaining traction, being shared by investigative bloggers and even local news. Journalists began showing up outside the gated entrances of Symmetry Hills, asking about misallocated funds, mysterious contracts, and biker sightings reported by concerned residents. Martha Klein tried to maintain composure, but cracks were forming. She had built her power on fear, compliance, and secrecy. Now fear had turned inward. Board members began resigning, one after another, fearing personal liability. The biker gang, too, was getting nervous. They hadn't signed up for a tech fortress armed with AI surveillance and media attention. One of their members was caught on camera attempting to vandalize a nearby transformer box. That footage went viral as well, labeled, "HOA goes rogue?" Under mounting pressure, Martha attempted damage control. She issued a public statement dismissing the claims as sensationalism and described Leonardo as a troubled individual with a flair for drama. But the damage was done. The public, once indifferent, now saw the HOA not as neighborhood guardians, but as aggressors abusing power. Leonardo hadn't just built a home. He'd pulled the rug from beneath an empire. And now the empire was flailing. The attack came not with fists or flames, but with spectacle. On the night of the community's annual HOA-sponsored Symmetry celebration, as families gathered in identical lawn chairs to watch the orchestrated fireworks show, a different kind of illumination began from Lot 67. Leonardo had prepared something unforgettable. At precisely 9:17 p.m., just as the official fireworks began to burst above the manicured rooftops, Leonardo's house lit up. Hidden panels rotated outward to reveal reflective metal surfaces, casting the HOA's fireworks back in wild, unpredictable colors. Maya activated a sequence through Athena that projected images onto the side of their house. Blueprints, documents, and quotes from the leaked HOA files. "Compliance is not peace," read one. "Uniformity is not unity," said another. The crowd gasped. Some cheered. Others panicked. Then came the bikers, summoned in one final, desperate push. Four of them tore down the street, engines roaring, fireworks still falling in the background. But the house was ready. Motion-triggered sound blasts disoriented them before they reached the property line. One swerved into a mailbox. Another fell trying to brake. Within minutes, the scene turned chaotic. Martha Klein, watching from a safe distance, could feel it all unraveling. The night that was supposed to celebrate control had become a showcase of defiance. And Leonardo hadn't even broken a single law. After the chaos of the Symmetry celebration, Leonardo knew the time for subtlety had passed. What came next had to be unmistakable. He and Augusto launched Operation Concrete Defense, a final layer of fortification that would serve as both physical protection and psychological deterrent. This was no longer about mere aesthetics. This was about preparing for siege, for spectacle, and for survival in the face of bureaucratic warfare. Augusto oversaw the pouring of a new, curved perimeter wall around the property, designed not to block, but to guide movement. "Let them come," he muttered. "But let them come where we want them." The concrete had embedded metal fibers, allowing it to withstand battering rams or even vehicle impact. At key points along the wall, Leonardo embedded minimalist sculptures, beautiful to the eye, but hollow and filled with non-lethal gas dispersers, flash projectors, and sound emitters calibrated to trigger disorientation. Maya coordinated the internal security systems with the new physical defense zones. Motion inside the wall would now trigger defensive choreography, a carefully planned sequence of lights, sounds, and diversions meant to confuse and exhaust intruders. From the outside, it looked like art. From the inside, it was a calculated symphony of resistance. Symmetry Hills had never seen anything like it. "This isn't a house anymore," Theo said as he examined the final structure. "This is an idea, poured in stone." The more Maya dug, the darker the roots grew. Using credentials harvested from the HOA's compromised internal network, she uncovered a folder buried beneath layers of encryption titled Expansion Directive. It wasn't about landscaping ordinances or property values. It was a real estate acquisition plan. The HOA had been covertly working with a private development firm, aiming to force out non-compliant homeowners and repurpose the neighborhood into a gated luxury enclave. Leonardo's lot sat directly in the path of their Central Park vision. Attached were blueprints, contracts, and a chilling spreadsheet of targeted properties, complete with psychological profiles of their owners. Martha Klein had been orchestrating the entire scheme under the guise of community improvement. Several board members were promised payouts once properties were reclaimed and rezoned. Leonardo's home, with its defiant structure and rising media attention, was the biggest threat to the plan, and thus the top priority for removal. Armed with this revelation, Maya called a covert meeting with a small group of sympathetic neighbors, those whose names were also on the list. With the documents projected across a wall in Leonardo's hidden bunker, the truth landed like thunder. They were never protecting this neighborhood, Maya said. They were selling it out. Fear turned into fury. These weren't just neighbors anymore. They were now witnesses, and some, whether they knew it or not, were about to become revolutionaries. It started with quiet knocks in the evening. One by one, residents of Symmetry Hills who had once kept their heads down began approaching Leonardo's lot under cover of night. First came Mr. and Mrs. Alvarez, retirees whose rose garden had been uprooted by the HOA for being non-native flora. Then came Naomi Patel, a teacher fined for hanging a wind chime deemed auditory pollution. Each of them carried stories of humiliation, threats, and silent compliance until now. Leonardo opened his home and his plans. In the underground war room, he showed them what was coming. The biker surveillance, the secret redevelopment project, and the defense systems already in place. Some were skeptical, others were angry, but all understood one thing: they had been living under illusion. What Symmetry Hills promised in order was, in truth, a kind of control designed to keep people small. "We don't have to fight like soldiers," Leonardo told them, "but we do need to stand like citizens." Soon roles formed. The Alvarezes started spreading the word among their senior walking group. Naomi printed flyers disguised as gardening tips, embedding QR codes that linked to Maya's leaks. A teenager named Lucas offered his drone to help map HOA patrols. The neighborhood was waking up. Leonardo's house was no longer a lonely monument of resistance. It was becoming headquarters, and every person who walked through its door was another brick in the wall against tyranny. The attack came just before sunrise. For motorcycles roared into Symmetry Hills, their engines loud enough to rattle windows and wake the dead. But this time, they weren't just circling or posturing. They came with intent. Armed with crowbars, bolt cutters, and fire accelerants, the bikers barreled straight toward Leonardo's property like wolves sent to tear down a monument. What they didn't know was that the house had been waiting for them. As the first bike crossed the perimeter, Athena triggered Protocol Aegis, a countermeasure sequence designed for live threat deterrence. Blinding lights shot up from hidden nodes, casting the yard into a surreal battlefield of white shadows and disorienting strobes. Maya, already awake and monitoring from the bunker, activated directional sound pulses. The bikers staggered, clutching their ears, unable to locate the source. One tripped over a low-slung cable camouflaged as part of the landscaping and was immediately netted by a tension trap Theo had rigged beneath the gravel. Augusto emerged from the side entrance, holding a custom rig that looked like a cross between a shield and a kinetic barricade. "No fire today," he growled, standing between the gang and the glass facade. The bikers, stumbling and half-blinded, tried to regroup, but neighbors, alerted by a coordinated signal through a private channel, began stepping outside. Cameras rolled. Phones lit up. The HOA's weapon of fear was now the subject of viral humiliation. Within minutes, the bikers fled, leaving behind broken tools, a dropped burner phone, and a neighborhood no longer afraid. As the sun rose over a shaken but defiant Symmetry Hills, Maya decrypted the final layer of the burner phone dropped during the ambush. Among its contents was a string of encrypted messages between the bikers and a number saved only as K. But once routed through voice pattern analysis and metadata tracing, the truth hit like a thunderclap. K was Martha Klein herself. Not a delegate. Not a proxy. Martha had been coordinating directly with the Iron Rain for weeks. Maya wasted no time. She compiled the evidence, audio clips, location data, payment logs, and stitched them together into a 4-minute exposé titled, "The Queen of Symmetry." The video opened with smiling images of Martha at ribbon cuttings and community bake-offs, before slamming into footage of the bikers, the ambush, and overlays of damning digital trails. She timed the upload for 8 a.m., just as families across the neighborhood were checking their morning phones. By noon, the HOA's headquarters were flooded with calls from residents and reporters alike. Parents were outraged. Elderly homeowners, once loyal to Martha, were horrified. A petition demanding her immediate resignation gathered over 500 signatures by the afternoon. HOA board members began giving statements to distance themselves from her. Martha, once untouchable, had become radioactive. She locked herself in her home, blinds drawn, phone off. Her empire, built on silence and sameness, was now collapsing under the weight of exposed truth. As the neighborhood reeled from Martha's exposure, journalists began requesting interviews with Leonardo, not just about the conflict, but about the house itself. What was once seen as a defiant oddity had become a symbol of resistance, and people wanted to understand the mind behind the design. Leonardo agreed to one interview on his terms. No studio, no makeup, just a walk through the house with a camera and a conversation about philosophy, not politics. He led the journalist through spaces that flowed like water, each room shifting subtly in shape and light. He explained how asymmetry challenged the eye to remain awake, how slanted ceilings forced people to lift their gaze, and how no wall stood without intention. Architecture, he said, is the art of directing emotion. They wanted me to build compliance. I built awareness. He showed them the passive defense systems, the hidden angles of sight, and even the secret atrium filled with sculptures carved from the very fines the HOA had levied against him. The footage went viral within hours. People weren't just impressed, they were moved. Leonardo had created something transcendent. A home that told a story, that fought for its right to exist. It wasn't just about HOA tyranny anymore. It was about the freedom to shape space, to dream without permission. Viewers from across the country began calling it the house that fought back. And inside its walls, Leonardo knew the final act was coming, because nothing disrupts a system more than an idea people can believe in. With the HOA leadership fractured and Martha in retreat, Leonardo anticipated desperation would soon drive their next move. He wasn't wrong. Anonymous tips warned of a final action being planned. One last attempt to destroy the house under the guise of code enforcement. Whether they used hired hands or legal muscle didn't matter. He had one goal left: make the cost of intrusion unbearable. Not through violence, but through precision. Together with Augusto, Leonardo mapped every possible access route, from the front gate to the rooftop ventilation. Each corridor inside the house was calibrated to control flow, doors that redirected, thresholds that triggered psychological effects, rooms filled with optical illusions that induced vertigo. Hidden mist projectors could fog entire hallways within seconds, and built-in speakers emitted directional sound pulses only detectable to intruders. "There is no straight path here," Leonardo said. "Only choices and consequences." Even the landscaping was weaponized. What appeared to be decorative water features were actually low-frequency disruptors. Garden sculptures doubled as antennae that interfered with unauthorized drones or communication signals. Maya embedded surveillance AI into the shadows, tracking movement by heat signature and behavior prediction. "They will come," she said, "but they will never see the same house twice." The entire structure was now alive, breathing defense at every joint. It wasn't just a fortress. It was an evolving mind with a single purpose: survival through disruption. The court summons came at dawn, delivered not by a sheriff's deputy, but by a private security officer hired by what remained of the HOA board. The accusation: community destabilization and violation of Development Code 4.16. It was a final attempt to break Leonardo not with fists, but with process. But this time, Leonardo didn't just prepare a legal defense. He prepared a performance. When the hearing was set, Maya launched a campaign called "Let the House Speak." clips of the home in action. Its shifting walls, its interactive systems, the art born from suppression, were posted online with commentary from architects, historians, and even former HOA board members. News outlets covered the story as if it were a cultural referendum. Was Leonardo's home a violation, or a visionary's triumph over suburban tyranny? The nation was watching. In court, Leonardo stood calmly in a tailored suit made of reclaimed fabric, sustainability even in his clothing. He didn't just argue his case. He told a story about freedom of expression, about weaponized conformity, about a house that gave people courage. "I didn't destabilize this community," he said, voice steady. "I revealed that it was never stable to begin with." Applause broke protocol in the courtroom. The judge, caught between precedent and public opinion, made no ruling that day. But the message was clear. The battle was no longer just legal. It was cultural, and Leonardo had already won that war. The day after the court hearing, Symmetry Hills imploded into open rebellion. For the first time in the community's pristine history, homeowners began openly defying HOA regulations. Lawns turned wild overnight, natural gardens blooming where sterile grass once stood. Families painted their doors in bright colors: turquoise, crimson, mustard yellow. One man parked a food truck in his driveway and started serving lunch. The HOA's hotline was overwhelmed. Their enforcers? Gone. Martha Klein's house was defaced, not with vandalism, but with irony. Someone projected Leonardo's viral quote across her front wall: "Compliance is not peace." Residents who had once whispered in grocery aisles now spoke publicly on neighborhood forums, sharing stories of intimidation and financial abuse. The atmosphere had shifted. What was once polished conformity now felt like a street filled with voices. Loud, clashing, human. HOA signs were ripped down. Board members deleted their social profiles. Leonardo watched from his balcony, arms crossed, as the streets became messy and alive. "You see that?" he said to Augusto. "That's not chaos. That's truth finally making noise." Augusto smirked and took a long sip from his coffee. "Looks like architecture worked," he said. And in a way it had. The house had not only protected itself, it had become a contagion of freedom. What had begun as a war against a man had ignited a revolution against an idea. The fallout from Symmetry Hills spread beyond the gates. Across the country, stories surfaced of similar communities where HOAs had grown unchecked, bulldozing individuality under the guise of neighborhood standards. But unlike before, people had a symbol now. Leonardo's house, with its radical angles and invisible defenses, became a beacon. Professors wrote essays on it. Art collectives recreated its design in miniature exhibits. A university invited Leonardo to lecture on architectural dissent in the age of control. But the true moment came when an international art magazine featured his home on its cover, declaring it the first house that fought back. The spread included images of Athena's code, Maya's network maps, and side-by-side comparisons of the HOA's sterile development plans versus Leonardo's living, breathing blueprints. "This isn't just architecture," the article stated. "It's an act of civil disobedience rendered in steel and stone." Leonardo never sought fame, but the world had chosen him as a figurehead. Inside the home, he stood quietly in the atrium, a space filled with fractured sunlight and sculptures made from pieces of former HOA warning signs. He walked among them, hands grazing the edges, and smiled. Art had done what politics and protest could not. It had pierced the illusion. "They wanted a house that disappeared," he whispered. "I gave them one that refuses to be forgotten." And with every mural painted across every HOA wall in every copycat suburb, it was clear. The house was still fighting, one mind at a time. It was Theo who discovered the breach. During a routine check of the subterranean systems, he noticed disturbed gravel near the old utility tunnel. Dust shifted, a faint trace of boot prints, and a wire left partially exposed. Someone had entered, or at least tried. They had found the tunnel. Whether it was a leftover biker cell, a rogue HOA loyalist, or something else entirely, Leonardo didn't wait to find out. He and Maya reviewed the surveillance feeds in silence. A figure, hooded and agile, had slipped through the darkness 2 nights prior. They didn't reach the interior, but they had gotten dangerously close to the server core where Athena's command systems were housed. They weren't here to destroy, Maya said. They were here to steal. It was no longer about eliminating the house. It was about replicating its power. Someone wanted Athena's mind. Leonardo acted fast. With Theo and Augusto's help, he installed decoy terminals and sealed the real control core beneath a false concrete slab, accessible only by biometric scan and encrypted voice command. The tunnel itself was restructured, no longer an escape route but a trap. Motion sensors now triggered a collapse protocol. Reinforced steel slabs that would lock in any intruder who tried to pass through. They want to copy us? Leonardo muttered. Let them walk into their own blueprint of failure. Came without warning, no revving engines, no legal notices, no flashing headlines. Just the sound of glass quietly cracking on the north side of the house. At 3:12 a.m., Athena triggered code Vermilion, a silent alarm reserved for breaches inside the shell. Leonardo woke instantly, followed by Maya, already alert and booting up the neural interface. On the screens, 3 figures inside the atrium, dressed in tactical black, no insignia. This wasn't amateur. This was trained. The intruders moved with precision, avoiding obvious cameras, scanning the structure as if they had blueprints of their own. But they underestimated the house's evolution. What was once a defensive layout had grown into an adaptive labyrinth. Lights flickered to throw off depth perception. Mirrors curved their reflections into dead ends. One stepped into the hallway rigged with subsonic pulses. He dropped to his knees in seconds, disoriented. Another attempted to bypass a panel door and found himself sealed in a soundproof void. Leonardo and Augusto emerged from the hidden corridor behind them, non-lethal rifles in hand, built from custom components. Gentlemen, Leonardo said, voice echoing across the chamber, you've mistaken a house for a prize, but this is a mind you can't tame. Maya locked the exits remotely. Police were already en route, called not by the residents, but by a new neighborhood alliance that now patrolled the streets. The infiltration wasn't just stopped. It was recorded, broadcast, and dissected by the public in real time. What was meant to be a final silencing became the ultimate exposure. In the days following the failed infiltration, Leonardo knew the battle was over, but the war of ideas had only just begun. The house had held its ground. The system had collapsed. And now people were asking what comes next. Sitting in his underground study, surrounded by fragments of every warning, blueprint, and resistance effort he'd endured, Leonardo unfurled a massive sheet of paper. Blank, silent, waiting. This would be his last design, not a home but a blueprint for others. He called it Project Scatterlight, a modular, open-source architectural movement designed for resistant living. Homes that could adapt to oppression, detect surveillance, amplify voices instead of muting them. With Maya's help, he encoded the principles into a living platform. Downloadable schematics, defense frameworks, legal loophole guides, and AI blueprints like Athena, all free. If they fear this house, he said, wait until there are hundreds. His final public address was delivered not from a podium, but from his atrium, surrounded by community members, artists, and even former HOA families. They tried to take my walls, he told the crowd, but they couldn't touch the foundation, because that foundation is choice. The choice to build, to question, to refuse. The crowd erupted in applause. He smiled, not with pride, but with relief. The house had done what it was meant to do, not just stand but ignite. And now others would build with fire in their hands. The dissolution of the Symmetry Hills HOA was not announced. It unraveled. Within 2 weeks of the failed infiltration, all remaining board members had either resigned or fled public life. The documents Maya released had been picked up by investigative journalists, and soon a deeper scandal unfolded. Years of unreported finances, kickbacks from the development company, even illegal surveillance of dissenting homeowners. Lawsuits followed like vultures over a battlefield. State authorities intervened and appointed a provisional oversight committee to dismantle the HOA's structure legally. Fines were levied, properties seized. The development firm backing Martha Klein went silent, then bankrupt, their reputation shredded by association. Meanwhile, residents of Symmetry Hills voted, unanimously, not to rebuild the HOA, but to establish a community guild, focused on transparency, creativity, and shared governance. The rulebook was replaced with a living document. Pages could be added, changed, or torn out by vote. Martha Klein, once the queen of conformity, was nowhere to be found. Rumors swirled. Some said she moved to a remote estate under a false name. Others believed she was facing quiet prosecution. But Leonardo didn't care. The machine had collapsed. What mattered wasn't the rubble. It was what rose from it. Children now played in streets once deemed excessively noisy. Color bloomed on every home. The community, once gripped by fear, now pulsed with freedom. The revolution had not only succeeded, it had reshaped the definition of home. 1 year later, Symmetry Hills was unrecognizable. Not in decay, but in vibrance. Gone were the identical fences and cloned facades. In their place stood homes painted with murals, walls covered in vines, porches where strangers laughed like old friends. The once muted suburb now sang with personality. A community once silenced by policy had found its voice, and that voice spoke in architecture, in gardens, in the refusal to ever again bow to fear masked as order. Leonardo's house stood at the center of it all, not as a fortress, but as a symbol. It now operated as a living museum, part residence, part school, part sanctuary for thinkers and builders. Architects came from all over the world to study it, walk through its shifting corridors, and understand how resistance had been poured into its very walls. In the atrium, where sunlight still fractured through asymmetrical glass, a plaque now read, "This house did not defy the standard. It rewrote it." On a quiet morning, Leonardo stood by the front steps, watching a group of local children sketch their dream homes on the pavement in chalk. One had a roof shaped like a spiral, another a tree growing through the middle. Maya stepped beside him, older now, but still brilliant, and whispered, "They're building already." Leonardo smiled, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Good," he said. "Let them build something no rulebook can contain." And just like that, the legacy was no longer his. It belonged to everyone brave enough to dream out loud.